Hello, my name is Trey Folkman,
And I'm Connor Albright.
and this is data flow diagrams. So, what is a data flow diagram? Well, basically, it is exactly what it sounds like. It's just a diagram depicting the flow of data through a system. And I think the main stipulation to take away from is it's not describing the data for a class as like a UML might. You would see a smaller class or function diagram in a UML diagram. A data flow diagram is depicting the flow of data between functions and classes for an entire system. So it's a much broader scope. The variables within a data flow diagram would be your data inputs, your data outputs, your data stores, your sub-processes, which are those functions and those classes and structs within systems that I was just talking about. And you will also have symbols and notations within data flow diagrams to help you see the flow of the data. And these are all going to be represented by symbols, which we'll talk about in the next slide. So these are the symbols and notations. So traditionally for a data flow diagram, you have these four different symbols. The first one obviously depicting a process, which is going to be like one of those sub-processes, like a function or even a loop within a function or a class or whatever it may be. And then you have your data store, which is a variable basically within a class or a function, passing information and then storing it in there. External entity would be another just representation of what function or class is being represented outside of maybe the specific process that you're describing. And then the data flow obviously would just be the flow of data between entities or processes and data stores. So how would you go about making a data flow diagram? First, you need to identify your inputs, identify your outputs, your sub-processes, and then once that is complete, you're going to have to determine the relationships between those two, which is going to be your data flowing, the depictions with arrows, and just connecting those all together. It's a pretty simple process. And then that whole process can be seen right here. This is just an example that I came up with really quick about a possible process that could be in the True application. So within the the Trailroo application, there's API callings from Google Maps and Google Maps affiliates, which I don't know if that'll be done within a function or what, but I'm assuming so. But you have your Google Maps and your affiliates, which are passing data inputs that are getting stored in those current coordinates and the destination coordinates. They're passing it through a loop within this function, which can be seen through the blue dotted line, which is a trust boundary. And that loop will loop through those and get the updated coordinates, which is a data input, to the updated coordinates data store, which will then pass data through to the display, which will then pass data to the user. So again, just a simple representation of data flowing through a system or a process.
And here are just some general advantages to data flow diagrams. A lot of these just like pretty much show like how it's easy to understand for users and like for technical like people like that are like programming and like making like the app, understand like those technical terms and everything, and also non-technical people that are maybe like investing money or something like that into the application or the software, whatever's being made. It's pretty easy to just understand, see how like the data flows for both type of people. And it's also just easily recognized as programmers. Programmers look at it and they can easily just understand right away that what it's showing is like data flow, and they're able to use that pretty quickly. So there's a lot of information for both of those. It also just like shows the boundaries of the system. So you're able to see just like exactly like what the data is doing. And so you can kind of see like what the data can and can't do from like the diagram they made, and easy to just understand that. And it just has a detailed representative of different like components within the system, saying what's doing what, like where the data comes from and how it's used at the end and what happens like in between. And these are just some disadvantages. There's not too many. The biggest thing is that it just takes a long time to create, which we're paying people to make the diagram. It can be pretty expensive and take a lot of time away from those people. So even if it's really useful, a lot of times just the time it takes to create one might be too much for someone to not create one, just depending on what situation is. Also, another minor disadvantages is that like physical considerations with the system are left out. So it doesn't like specifically go into a lot of specifics and like capabilities and everything specifically.
Yeah, and if I could just add one thing, through our research that we did, it was clear that, as Connor said, the biggest disadvantage is how long it can take to make one of these. And what was interesting is the research said that some managers won't even give permission, which is what that second dot is kind of referring to. It's kind of hard to understand from the sentence, but it's kind of referring to the fact that managers won't even green light the data flow diagram process because they know how long it's going to take, even though it is a pretty well-defined way to represent a system, and it's pretty easily understandable and well used. Just that the length of time it can take to use it is a pretty big drawback, is what we found.
And then for conclusion, it's just that these data flow diagrams are very useful, and it describes just like the processes and systems, specifically with the data and how the data moves and goes through the system. They're very easy to recognize and understand the data flow just by looking at it by both technical and not technical individuals, but they just create that long time to actually make one, and which may in fact make it so it's not utilized just because of how long it takes.
And that is it. There are those sites. Thanks, guys.